I never realized my neighbor's car crash was planned until my apartment camera glitched. It happened on a Tuesday night. I was sitting at my desk, finishing a logo design, when the security feed on my second monitor flickered. The screen froze, showing his silver sedan halfway through a sharp turn in the garage. His headlights were off. His timing was completely wrong. He wasn't trying to park, he was trying to hit something. It looked like a movie scene that had been rehearsed a dozen times before the cameras started rolling. My name is Riley Hayes. I'm 31 years old, recently divorced, and I spend most of my time alone in this Denver apartment. I moved here because it was quiet. I used to tell myself that quiet meant safety. I thought if I stayed inside and minded my own business, nothing bad could ever happen to me. I was wrong. Very wrong. After my divorce papers were finalized, the silence in my apartment became heavy. It sharpened my senses. I started noticing things I never saw before. I noticed the thinness of the walls and the strange rhythm of the building. I heard doors opening at 3 a.m. I heard heavy footsteps that would stop right outside my door and stay there for a long minute before moving on. I started to wonder, who is walking the halls when everyone else is asleep? Then, the packages started appearing. They weren't from Amazon or FedEx. They were plain brown boxes, taped shut with thick, messy layers of gray duct tape. They always appeared outside my neighbor's door, Unit 4C. One morning, I walked past his door and saw a box with dark, wet stains on the corners. The stain was metallic and deep red. It was unmistakably blood. My stomach did a somersault. I watched through my peephole as my neighbor grabbed the box and pulled it inside his apartment in a split second. He didn't look left or right. He didn't check for cameras. He moved like a man who knew exactly what was inside that box. 2 nights after the garage incident, I ran into him near the mailboxes. I noticed fresh, deep scratches slashed across the bumper of his car. Silver lines were biting through the dark paint. He was standing there, barefoot on the cold tile, smoking a cigarette with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. When he noticed me watching him, his face changed. He forced a smile that looked like cracking ice. He looked at me and asked in a low voice, "Hey Riley, did you hear that loud crash last night?" It woke me up. I looked at his shaking hands, and then back at his eyes. I knew he was lying. I knew the crash happened because of him. But I just shook my head and told him, "No, I didn't hear a thing." I lied because, in that moment, my gut told me that knowing the truth was a death sentence. The truth was, the crash wasn't news to me. I hadn't just heard it. I had witnessed it. Earlier that night, the moon was hidden behind thick clouds, making the street below my window look like a black void. I had been standing there, nursing a cold cup of coffee, staring at nothing, when I saw headlights jump the curb near the entrance. There was no screeching of tires, no honking of a horn. It was silent, deliberate, and final. I saw a bicycle flip sideways into the air. The metal frame twisted like paper, and the spokes screamed as they snapped, though the sound was drowned out by the heavy wind. A figure was thrown into the bushes, Marissa Cole. I knew it was her, because of the bright blue helmet she always wore. I stood frozen, my breath fogging up the glass. I should have grabbed my phone. I should have screamed. But fear has a way of swallowing your voice before you can even open your mouth. I watched the car, my neighbor's car, idle for a moment, before disappearing into the darkness of the garage. I told myself someone else would call 911. Someone braver. Someone closer. I didn't realize that in this building, no one is ever truly brave. They're just survivors. The next morning, the guilt felt like a physical weight in my chest. I walked down to the lobby to check my mail, hoping to see a normal flyer or a bill. Instead, I found a single white envelope tucked inside my mailbox. There was no stamp, no return address. Just my name, Riley Hayes, written in perfect, practiced handwriting. My hands trembled as I tore it open. Inside was a single sentence that made my blood turn to ice. "Curiosity killed the cat, Riley. Stay away from the windows and keep the cameras out of your mind." I felt like the walls were closing in. Someone knew I was watching. I looked up at the lobby's security camera, but it was pointed at the floor, its red light dead. I hurried toward the leasing office, my heart hammering against my ribs. I needed to see the building manager. I needed to know why the cameras weren't working. When I stepped inside the office, the manager, Mr. Henderson, didn't even look up from his desk. He was a small man with a fake smile that never reached his eyes. Before I could even finish my sentence about the garage footage, his smile stiffened. He looked past me, toward the delivery entrance. Standing there was a man in a beige uniform. He wore no company logo, no name tag. He was just there. He held a clipboard and nodded at me, a slow, creepy gesture like we shared a secret I never agreed to keep. "Camera glitches happen, Riley," Henderson said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "This is an old building. Sometimes things break. My advice? Don't go digging for things that aren't there. Accidents spiral out of control when people interfere." He went back to his paperwork, but I could see his hand shaking as he gripped his pen. He wasn't just dismissing me, he was warning me. That night, I stayed locked in my apartment with the lights off. Around 11 p.m., I heard the heavy thud of a delivery in the hallway. I waited, then peeked through the peephole. Another package sat outside Unit 4C. It was bigger this time, and the cardboard was soaked through at the bottom. A metal rod was poking out of the side. It was a bicycle wheel, bent violently out of shape. My stomach dropped. I recognized the blue paint streaks on the rim. It was Marissa's bike. I felt a sudden burst of anger, mixed with terror. I opened my door, intending to knock on my neighbor's door and demand answers. But as soon as I stepped into the hallway, a shadow moved. The delivery man was standing at the end of the hall, near the elevator. He wasn't moving. He was just breathing. Heavy, steady breaths that echoed in the silence. "Mistakes disappear when neighbors mind themselves," he said, his voice like gravel. I didn't say a word. I grabbed the edge of the box near my door. Wait, it wasn't at my neighbor's door anymore. It had been moved. It was sitting directly in front of my door now. I dragged the heavy, leaking box inside my apartment and locked all 3 deadbolts. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely stand. I looked down at the label on the box. Beneath the blood-soaked wrapping, my apartment number, for B, was circled in red ink. Why was MY number on this box? What was happening to Marissa, and why was I being invited into this nightmare? Stood in my living room, staring at the bloody box I had just dragged inside. The air in my apartment felt different, heavy, like someone else was breathing the same oxygen. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I looked at my smoke detector in the hallway. It was a standard white plastic disc, something I never gave a second thought to. But tonight I noticed a tiny, pin-sized hole near the edge. I grabbed a kitchen chair, climbed up, and pulled the cover off. My heart nearly stopped. Tucked behind the plastic was a high-tech lens, smaller than a marble, with a tiny red light that blinked once every 5 seconds. This wasn't a building security camera. It was a private bug, and it wasn't pointed at the front door to keep me safe. It was angled directly toward my sofa and my workspace. Someone had been watching me eat, sleep, and work for weeks. I followed the thin black wire behind the drywall. It didn't lead to the building's power grid. It was connected to a battery pack that looked professional, expensive, and hidden with surgical precision. I disconnected it with trembling fingers, but the silence that followed was even more terrifying. If they weren't watching me through the lens anymore, they would surely know the feed had gone dark. I needed to know where that bicycle wheel came from. I put on a pair of thick gardening gloves and pulled the bent metal out of the cardboard box. It was cold and smelled of wet earth and copper. I wiped away a layer of dried blood from the rim and found a small, reflective silver sticker. Property of Highland Apartments, Storage Unit 3B. Unit 3B. That was Marissa Cole's unit. She was the girl from the hidden run, the girl the manager claimed was just missing. I knew I had to go down there. I grabbed a heavy flashlight and a small pocket knife, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I crept out into the hallway, avoiding the elevator. I didn't want the chime to announce my movement. I took the stairs, my footsteps echoing in the concrete well, down past the lobby, down into the bowels of the building where the air turned cold and damp. The basement was a labyrinth of wire mesh lockers and humming water pipes. The lights flickered overhead, casting long, dancing shadows against the brick walls. I found the row for the 300 series units. 3A. 3B. The padlock on Marissa's locker was missing. The door was slightly ajar, creaking softly as the building's ventilation system pushed a draft through the room. I pushed the door open, the metal screeching against the concrete floor. What I saw inside made me lose my breath. The locker wasn't filled with boxes or suitcases. It was a surveillance hub. The walls were covered in printed photographs pinned to corkboards. There were dozens of photos of the garage entrance, the lobby, and the mailboxes. But the center board was dedicated entirely to me. There was a photo of me carrying groceries last Tuesday. A photo of me crying on the phone with my lawyer 3 weeks ago. A photo of me sleeping on my couch, taken through my own living room window. I felt violated. I felt like a specimen in a jar. On a small metal shelf sat a thick, black leather notebook. The word sequence was embossed on the cover in gold letters. I opened it, my hands shaking so hard I almost dropped my flashlight. It was a ledger, a record of crimes. It listed apartment numbers, insurance policy amounts, and incident dates. I saw Marissa's name. Next to it was the date of her crash and a dollar amount, $250,000. Under her name, there was a handwritten note. Stage 1 complete. Evidence stored. Move to next phase. I flipped to the last page. My blood ran cold. My name, Riley Hayes, was circled in thick red ink. Below my name was a detailed map of my daily routine. 7:30 a.m., coffee. 9 a.m., starts work. 6 p.m., walks to mailbox. Friday, 11:30 p.m., final sequence. The final sequence was scheduled for this Friday. That was only 2 days away. I wasn't just a witness to a crime. I was the next accident on the list. I realized then that the packages, the scratches on the car, and the bloody will weren't just warnings. They were trophies. They were part of a ritual. I turned to run, but a sound from the shadows stopped me dead in my tracks. A heavy, metallic clink. The sound of a door being locked from the outside. I wasn't alone in the basement anymore. I could hear the steady, rhythmic breathing of someone standing just around the corner of the storage row. It was the same breathing I had heard in the hallway. The delivery man. And this time, he wasn't carrying a package. Pressed my back against the cold metal of Marissa's locker, my heart thumping so hard I thought it would burst through my chest. The breathing in the shadows stopped. Then, a voice echoed through the basement, calm, cold, and terrifyingly familiar. You were always too observant, Riley. That's why you were chosen. The others, they don't look up. They don't notice the glitches. But you? You look for the truth even when it's dangerous. It was my neighbor, the man from Unit 4C. He stepped into the light of my flashlight, but he wasn't the shaking, nervous man I saw near the mailboxes. He was standing tall, dressed in a black tactical jacket, holding a radio. He wasn't a victim of the building's accidents. He was the one directing them. He was the handler mentioned in the notebook. Where is Marissa? I managed to whisper, my voice cracking. He smiled, and this time, it wasn't a fake smile of a neighbor. It was the grin of a predator. He pointed toward a heavy steel door at the very back of the boiler room, a door marked high voltage, no entry. She's part of the insurance payout now, Riley. And by Friday night, so will you. A tragic fall down the stairs, perhaps? Or a gas leak in 4B. We haven't decided yet. He moved toward me, but I didn't wait. I threw my heavy flashlight at his face and bolted in the opposite direction. I didn't run for the stairs. I knew he'd catch me there. Instead, I dove behind the false maintenance wall he had pointed to. I kicked the door marked high voltage and, to my surprise, it wasn't locked. It was a decoy. Inside, the room was brightly lit with fluorescent bulbs. It looked like a hospital room mixed with a prison cell. There, on a small cot, sat Marissa Cole. She was thin, pale, and her arm was in a cast, but she was alive. Her eyes widened when she saw me. You shouldn't have come here, she sobbed. They have the police. They have the city inspectors. No one is coming to help. She explained the horrifying truth. The building was a harvesting ground. They didn't just stage accidents for insurance. They kept the victims as leverage to ensure their families wouldn't ask too many questions. The packages I saw? They were the victims' belongings, sent back and forth to keep the paper trail moving. I pulled my phone out. I had no bars for a regular call, but I saw a faint signal from the building's guest Wi-Fi. I didn't call 911. I knew the local precinct was in on the take. Instead, I opened a live streaming app and hit record. I pointed the camera at Marissa, then at the sequence notebook I had tucked into my waistband. "My name is Riley Hayes," I said to the camera, my voice gaining strength. "I am in the basement of the Highland Apartments. If I disappear, look at this book. Look at these men." The door burst open. My neighbor and the delivery man rushed in, their faces turning pale when they saw the glowing screen of my phone. "Turn it off," the neighbor screamed. But it was too late. Thousands of people were already watching. The footage was being mirrored to servers across the country. I wasn't just a witness anymore. I was a global broadcast. The handler lunged for me, but the sound of heavy boots echoed from the floor above. Not the slow, steady footsteps of the manager, but the thunderous rhythm of a SWAT team. I had tagged the FBI's regional office in the stream's description. Because I had bypassed the local police, the federal agents arrived with a warrant for human trafficking and organized fraud before the building manager could even delete the server data. The next hour was a blur of blue and red lights. I watched from the back of an ambulance as Marissa was carried out on a stretcher, finally free. I watched the manager, the delivery man, and my neighbor being led away in zip ties. The neighbor looked at me one last time, his eyes full of a cold, silent promise of revenge. But I didn't flinch. This sequence was broken. I moved out of that apartment the same night. I didn't take my furniture. I didn't take my logos. I only took my life.
Now I
live in a small town where the buildings are only 2 stories high, and everyone knows everyone's name. I still check the smoke detectors. I still watch the hallways. People tell me I'm paranoid, but I know better. I know that sometimes the person living next door isn't just a stranger. Sometimes they are a director, and you are just an actor in a play you never auditioned for. So, take a look at your own hallway tonight. Check the cameras. Listen to the footsteps. Because the next accident might be scheduled for Friday, and you might be the lead role. Like, share, and subscribe for more real stories. Stay safe. Stay observant. Because they're always watching.